Hi, everyone. My name is Alisée. I'm one of the co-founders of SeedStars. It's an organization that I launched over a decade ago. And I think the objective here is to share you a bit more pragmatic insights of how we're trying to practice a bit what has been elaborated of the complexities of migration and how do we actually try to support resilience and inclusive growth. So quickly about SeedStars to give you the context, and then maybe I'll go straight into pragmatic examples and we can then debate, comment, reflect on what has been said so far. SeedStars has a very simple mission. We want to back entrepreneurs in emerging economies with capital, know-how, and community. So how we do that, capital, we now have we have 200 million asset under management across grant, debt, and equity. So we operate different funds and investment vehicles that are tailored to these markets and entrepreneurs. And of course, the riskier or more fragile the community of entrepreneurs or the industry that we're trying to tackle, the more customized we try to build in blended finance approaches to de-risk these entrepreneurs to the private market. We bring in know-how, so we're building different programs, the typical acceleration, investment readiness programs. Of course, all this now powered by AI, which is helping us to reach a certain scale, to support them in providing the right mentorship, business training skills so that they can build resilience within the scalability of their business. And finally, community. It's been said again and again, it's very interesting to see that many ways a lot of the emergency crises have been solved by community before more pragmatic or regulated approaches. And in that case, we really operate a network of over 200,000 people around the world, startups, investors, mentors, experts, coaches, serial entrepreneurs to support these entrepreneurs. And we've seen the most growth, especially in our peer-to-peer sessions. And that's usually where you see kind of the most trust and so the most learnings that happen the quickest in our sprints. So we operate in 90 markets and we've been doing this over the past decade. And when we were looking at migration, it was quite accidental initially because we started from a perspective of addressing a very finite group of entrepreneurs, which were startups. So startups are usually the entrepreneurs that are expected to build very high growth ventures and strong innovation and disruption. These types of entrepreneurs usually are interested in the type of capital which would be equity backed. So they would connect with venture capitalists. That's why we launched our first seed stage venture capital fund across 35 markets, really around the world. And so in working with these startups, quickly we met entrepreneurs, migrant entrepreneurs, which are also the success stories of these economies from Venezuela and Argentina, building their business in Brazil, participating in the ecosystem and the disruption. We later understood economies like El Salvador and the importance of remittance and how much it was actually building, stabilizing, and ensuring the productivity of those economies and understanding really what was presented before, these ripple effects of what it means to support inclusive entrepreneurship and understanding what migration is. Then we became more thoughtful and strategic in what, in many ways, as climate change crisis was more and more addressed across the markets we were working in, there were two options. Either there was a viable solution to believe that these other secondary cities or urban areas would not empty out. And so what was the type of opportunities with our programs and capital we could provide? So we would build jobs and we could support entrepreneurs to build employment, and we could support them to build more dignity to their suppliers, customers, and everyone in the value chain. Or the second reflection was in the case of forced migration due to conflict or to different climate crises, for example, how could we build inclusive approaches of supporting entrepreneurs, these migrants that were through internal borders or across borders, having to reinvent themselves, and what would be the ecosystem needed and where were the gaps and how we could support. So we've done many programs over the years, but to cite you two concrete ones today that we do, and I was asked to be more specific on Africa because we've spoken a bit about Asia today. We have the SHIFT program. The SHIFT program was us trying to reflect how many women migrants could we reach as quickly as possible, and where we could prove that we had increased the dignity either of their livelihood or support them directly and indirectly in social improvement. So what we thought was, if we are able to help fintech companies, so companies that are providing financial services, microcredit, that are participating in the value chain of remittance, that are participating in helping people build their credit profile and credit history, if we could support those fintech companies or companies that had financial services embedded in their business model, and ask them to either target the more fragile community of women migrants, in our case, because we realize in migrants, in that community, women are doubly impacted. And we saw the example, for example, of women in India left behind and putting themselves in more fragile situations, then we could potentially have a strong reach. So we work with different fintech companies. This program was global, but also in Africa, in trying to understand what did we need to do for their business model to work and scale so that they could raise more money and reach hundreds of thousands of consumers, or working with the more social enterprises that were already tackling the very serious problem of figuring out how to support those women entrepreneurs. And we've had great results. And I think this was a reflection of, if we go too direct, just supporting the micro entrepreneur or the migrant one by one, we weren't able to leverage the scale effect. And so these fintech companies, the objective was to prove that they could receive follow-on funding, that they could integrate in their business model these more fragile communities as appropriate customers, because we would help them to reduce the unit economics so that it would be economically viable to target these consumers. If not, it doesn't work the long run. And the beauty of it all is most of these entrepreneurs, especially the more social ones that were targeting specifically women entrepreneurs, were themselves women founders that were women affected by migration directly. And so to give an example, we have Rebecca from Uganda, who was actually displaced at 11 from DRC. For 12 months was living with no shelter, finally arrived in Uganda with the support of different mentors and people that inspired her. She launched her fintech business, which has for sole purpose to provide credit profiling and history to de-risk women entrepreneurs, women refugees in those regions, which are many, to access more institutional investment. So that's one of the many examples we've encountered. With that, capital is extremely important. So the innovation here, which we are trying to test more and more in the market, is impact-linked incentives. So what we're trying to do to de-risk the profile of these entrepreneurs for the private market or for public funding is to prove the viability of these businesses and the resilience of these entrepreneurs. And so we built the ILF fund with different partners, iGravity, the Swiss Development Corporation, there was the Austrian Development Bank, so many different actors, which is a fund that matches private investment, but the matching, the grant money that is provided to these entrepreneurs is not linked to their financial KPIs, it's linked to their impact metrics. So the more they were able to prove to us that they could target, support, build more dignified lives for these women entrepreneurs, for these women migrants, the more they would receive funding. So for the first time in many times, we were trying to recalibrate what were the right kind of return on investments to prove that there was value in having this type of return on impact. And we would reward it financially. A second example is now we're launching a large program with one of the bigger foundations in Africa, called Pathways to Scale. We're working in Nigeria, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Ghana, especially Nigeria and Ethiopia. In Rwanda, we have big refugee migrant communities. And so it was working in the more fragile states and trying to address the fragility of young women in peri-urban and rural area settings. So in this case, what we understood, as I mentioned, historically, we started with supporting startups. The reality is the spectrum of entrepreneurs goes from these micro entrepreneurs to the SMEs that fuel the economy, just like in Switzerland, to these high growth companies that bring disruption. And we built for the first time a program that would address all these segments of entrepreneurs with a $20 million concessional debt fund. And the objective is to provide mentorship and business support for all these entrepreneurs at the same time, because we always have the complexity of scale. We would really like to scale our impact, but it's very complicated because there is no one size fits all model. So this is our first attempt to try in a grassroots approach to operate across 4 segments in 4 countries across many different states and peri-urban rural areas with a funding mechanism that is appropriate for these entrepreneurs. So in this case, the micro-entrepreneur, the woman that has a small farm in northern state of Ethiopia, we would provide to her a micro loan, which would not be with a collateral, which would have very appropriate interest rate and a longer tenure, so a longer reimbursement cycle, hoping to provide enough credit history and data collection from her business to then present it to the MFIs and the local banks so that they can embed her in the system, because the whole objective is to build this inclusive approach of having them officially be part of the economy. There's her, but then there is the agri-processor that employs 12 migrant women. And so how can we support in buying their second machine so that they can hire 5 additional casual workers in this market? And what would be the appropriate debt for this entrepreneur? And then it goes to the high growth. We're working with a company in Nigeria that currently is a marketplace between FMCG groups, so the Nestle, the Procter & Gamble, and the small typical retailer on the market in Nigeria. Well, 200,000 retailers are present on the platform. 70% are women, and most of them are employing young women in peri-urban rural areas. So how can we help them specifically focus on that target of women entrepreneurs, which are still for them the riskier credit profiles? So we're going to help them with our debt to use this debt for those women so that we can prove that they are strong, resilient businesses to invest in. So these are 2 types of examples of how we reflect on migration. And last comment is, I think for us, what has been revolutionary in the past 18 months and what I quickly mentioned in terms of scale and impact, because it's really for us, how do we do this in a magnified level? If not, it feels kind of a drop in the ocean, is AI. I know there's a lot of fear about AI, but I believe used responsibly, in our case, using a platform that allows us to go last mile to try and start working with AI, which has allowed us in a cost-efficient manner to imagine speaking in the same dialect as the entrepreneur on the ground, to imagine actually collecting all the data necessary so that I can build the right unit economics so the bank believes that the default rate is low enough to invest in these type of entrepreneurs, is actually closing the gap for us. So I believe also that for us is a revolution, and we're very much at the beginning of how this can have an impact on migration. So yeah, I think that's kind of the 2 examples, and happy to share more in the second phase. Thank you.